until all have heard.
Welcome to Friends in Action's podcast, where you get to meet some of our staff and hear stories about how God is working through construction and service projects to support missionaries in isolated communities around the world. This is a great opportunity for you to get to learn some about of the background of our staff and also what brought them into ministry. So today, we get joined by our Executive Director, Matt Durkee. He is the Executive Director of Friends in Action. Welcome, Matt, to the show.
Thank you, Andy. It's good to be here.
All right, before we jump in to your role with Friends in Action, I'd love to start with something fun. Like many of us travel here with Friends in Action. You've traveled a lot, and you'll share your history here in a little bit. What is your go-to road trip snack? What's your go-to?
Well, it's kind of funny. It doesn't matter how far I go or wherever it is that we end up. I actually don't do snacks a lot. As boring as that is, pretty much I travel with a cup of coffee and the Lord. It's all that I need as I go, corny as that is.
Okay, so that's when you're traveling by yourself. What about, again, we'll get into that you're based in Canada and you drive down with your family sometimes to the U.S. What about your family's go? There's got to be a go-to snack for your kids.
Yeah, well, they definitely enjoy goldfish. So that's one thing that they like to go for. Apple snacks. I don't know, mostly what kids like. Gummy bears, any kind of candy that keeps them busy. Although screen time that usually keeps them a little bit more occupied than the snacks do.
Yeah, no, I hear you. So a neat fun fact is that Matt and myself actually started full time in our positions. I guess we could say that at the same time, January 1st of 2022. So of course, you've been involved with Friends in Action for many, many, many years. But when we officially started our roles, yours as executive director and mine as COO, it was kind of the same day. So kind of a fun fact there. Tell us a little bit about your background before executive director role in missions. Give us a little bit of your background, maybe your schooling, and then what got you into missions.
Sure. Well, I guess it really does start with what got me into missions in the first place. I grew up in the Christian Missionary Alliance Church, which is a denomination in northwestern U.S., eastern Canada, western Canada, so the Canadian version or the Canadian side of that denomination. And missionaries were always present in our church. So probably every 2 Sundays a month, at least once a month, if not 2 Sundays a month, we'd have someone from some country somewhere around the world sharing about what God was doing. My mom was on the missions committee for, pretty much as long as I can remember, which usually meant after Sundays we had the missionary coming over to our house and just got to hear more and more about what some of those mission stories were, and really found out when I was young how real these people were. And the Lord at that point started building a heart for missions and a heart for the lost. And I still remember when I was probably mid-teen, was when I really committed myself to the idea of missions. And God, whether you're going to use me to go somewhere or to support and send people out somewhere, I really felt that the Lord had a special calling for me in missions, and I was willing to pursue him in that. I started out thinking when I was getting towards the end of high school that I'd be heading to Bible school. That was just the thing that all the youth in our church did. You graduated high school. You went to Bible school for at least a year, and you came back either married or in some kind of vocational degree. So that's what I was going to be doing. And I was challenged by one of the mentors that I had growing up, who essentially said, if I was serious about getting involved in missions, to consider actually not going to Bible school. And that was something I was very surprised to hear coming from another missionary. He was actually the district superintendent at the time. And I thought about that. And very quickly afterwards, there was another guy that came over who was a former missionary who said the same thing. He said, the number of places in the world where a vocationally trained missionary can go and serve and have liberty to be able to talk to people about Jesus, though there's ample opportunity now, it's going to get less and less as times move forward. And this was, this is almost 25 years ago now. Scary thought.
Well, that's interesting too, because you look back and you think like that probably similar to myself. Like you were thinking, well, missionaries, that's what you do. You go to Bible college. That's your first step. I mean, you go to Bible college, you got to be taking some type of Bible degree in evangelism or church planning. So that's interesting.
And that was always my thing was, well, before you go, you got to know. And so, and it makes sense, especially if you're going to be as a missionary going and telling people about Jesus. You need to have all the right understanding to get that right foundation, so people have that right biblical worldview. And then when I heard it from somebody else too, he actually took it a step further, and he said, well, this is the reason why I'm challenging you not to go that route. Because if you were to use your interests and your abilities in school, for me, I really love the sciences. I was really good at taking things apart, not so good at putting things back together again, but more on that later. But using those interests and seeing how God could use those to potentially develop a skill that could get me into some of these countries where, as a Christian, outwardly sharing I'm a missionary, I may not be invited, but some of my other skills could actually welcome me in, and they could be useful for the sake of the kingdom. He said even at that time, I was 16, 17, he said, consider that, pray over that. Is that an option? So it didn't take long for me to actually, I still remember actually that one conversation, because he said, so tell me, he says, what's your favorite subject in school? Again, this is me in high school. I said, well, science and math. He said, okay. What's your least favorite subject? I said, English, writing. He said, if you go into like pastoral ministry, all you're doing is writing. I was like, okay. So that's a good sell to try something different. So anyways, I switched gears, decided to follow the maths and sciences, and I was accepted at a school for engineering, got my engineering degree. And all throughout the time I was at school, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to graduate. I'm going to apply to a missions organization, go overseas, do engineering work, or do some kind of support and ministry that way. And I tried all throughout school to line up with different mission organizations all the way up till I graduated. And every time I tried, the door closed. I said, well, you know what, Lord, maybe I was wrong. Maybe missions wasn't what you were calling me to. And so I made that decision even there. So if I can't go, then I'll be the best sender I can. And so graduated school, got a job at an engineering firm, and started working environmental engineering for a big company in Canada. Started making a lot of money, going all over the world doing engineering work. And I think it was roughly 30 to 40% of my income I was just giving it away. I was a single guy, didn't have anything tying me down, cool. Just giving it away to the Lord. And so that's kind of where it all started. And then one day I got a call from this guy that I knew. I was on the missions committee at the church I was serving in. And he was a missionary for the church, and he called me up and he said, hey, my name is Tim Johnson. You don't know me very well, but you've been recommended for a position that we have open within our mission organization to do work overseas. And would you be willing to consider it? And I still remember getting that call, and my heart just started pounding in my chest, because there's some times in life that like you hear something and you just know this is me. This is what God has me in this place for. And here I was. It was actually, ironically, it was in the middle of the day. I was at my cubicle working for the engineering firm. And he's on the phone, and it's like I'm hearing the Lord speak directly to me right in that cubicle. And Tim essentially described the ministry role, and it was exactly me. And fast forward a year and a half later, I was on the mission field.
Very cool. That's cool. So the connection there was Tim Johnson, and that was the connection from their missions committee at your church then. Very neat. So before that, you've never heard of Friends in Action or really what we've done?
So before that, I had known friends because Tim Johnson was, at the time, he was the director. He's the former director of Friends in Action. And so for 26 years, he had been working with Friends, building the organization as the director. And he was also the supported missionary through the church that I was attending at that time. So I had known him peripherally. I had met him once. Actually, he was speaking at the church the very first time I went to check out this church as a student. And he happened to be speaking there, and the Lord used him speaking that Sunday to say, "This is what I could use you for." And again, I had no idea that him saying, or Tim giving that talk, the Lord speaking to my heart, meant that I would eventually be working with Friends in Action and with this guy. I just thought the Lord was saying, look at this road that I've led you on. Look how I could use you in the future. Here's an area. Here's to give you. I thought he was giving me hope and encouragement that at some point I could do something similar. I didn't realize it could potentially be me actually stepping into Tim's role, which is what happened some 12 years after I started working for the mission.
Interesting. So that phone call with Tim, what was that perfect position that Tim had for you, that Friends in Action had for you? What was your next step?
So my first introduction to FIA was working with the Water of Life Ministry, which is our well drilling ministry in West Africa. They had at the time when he reached out to me, they had a driller on the ground. They had a mechanic that was supporting and servicing the work. So both North American missionaries that had gone across using their hands-on skilled trades to support this work, and they were looking for a project manager. So the nature of the work was working alongside the national church. So we're in the country of Burkina Faso at the time. So working alongside an established national church that were looking to do church planning movements along unreached peoples or least reached peoples in the country. And also alongside international mission organizations. So the likes of Christian Missionary Alliance, SIM, Wycliffe, Southern Baptist, just to name a few of the ones that we might know on this side of the ocean. So we would either go and drill wells to support the church plants that were taking place, and they would all be community wells as well, so deep water wells. So you drill a hole in the ground, supply it with a pump, and it's usually on church property because that would be the group that would be responsible for servicing the equipment, servicing the hand pump and making sure it keeps running, but it would be a commonly available water source for the entire community. And in some places, there wasn't even a church yet. And so the well was actually drilled in order to open the opportunity for missionaries or pastors to come in, to build a relationship, to show compassion and to meet a need. And then through that, to be talking to the people about Jesus, oftentimes in their heart language.
Very good.
So coming into that, it was interesting because Tim, I asked him on the phone, why me, why this? And so he just kind of listed off probably 3 or 4 things, or 4 or 5 things that really described me. So he talked about the fact they needed someone who spoke French. It's a French-speaking country, and being in Canada, I grew up speaking French, potentially more than most people actually in Canada do, who aren't francophone to begin with. So I'm a fluent French speaker. I actually had international experience doing project management with wells through the engineering firm. I'd actually worked on a well drilling rig in Ontario for about a year, actually as part of a co-op experience, and fell in love with drilling. And again, it's some of those small stepping stones along the journey that you don't think about, you don't realize how God pulls all those pieces together. And I think the biggest thing was having a heart for missions and being willing to use the skills and gifts that God had given to me, not necessarily to be the one going to speak the word, but willing to go and live it out through the practical ways. And so when he he described it, those were his words, not mine, when he started describing this is the need. And I'm just looking at it's like a glove for a hand, and I'm the hand. And it was, you can't make that stuff up. That was just the Lord.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really neat. So, you had gone to West Africa to kind of lead the West African well drilling team. What do those teams look like? You were living in it. Yeah, I assume you lived in the country. You were a full-time missionary then. Family yet? What did that look like when you took drill teams out?
Yeah, well, way back when. So when I was first heading out there to do the work, starting off, it was just me. So I was 24 when I said yes to the Lord to head out. Still quite wet behind the ears when it comes to knowing what I was getting myself into, or experience in many ways. My my intentions in going out there, what I've been asked to do was to be the project manager. And like I said, I had well drilling experience. I had the language, but go back to what I had said earlier as we started chatting. I was really good at taking things apart, but not so good at putting them back together again. So I did not have the mechanical competencies to be jumping into to do everything that's involved in the work. So I was grateful to be part of a team. Like I said, we had a mechanic out there, and we had a well driller who was going to be handling a lot of that. So I hit the field, single guy. We're going to be doing some survey work, and within 4 months of me getting there, the well driller left the field, and the mechanic moved to another ministry. So wow. I inherited a ministry that was so out of my depth. And I'll be honest with you, we didn't have a big plan for teams to begin with. The intention was to build an in-country team. So Friends in Action in many of our fields, even right now, we don't just have short-term teams. We actually have full-time teams serving on the ground. So when our short-termers aren't there, there's other ministries that they're involved in, are actually the same ministries that they keep moving forward. And our short-term teams, when they come out, they really help accelerate that process or accelerate that ministry for a short, intense period of time. And that's the pivot that we had to make when we lost our driller and we lost the mechanic. I was like, well, I need people to come out and help me do this because I can't do it on my own. We had just started training a national guy to help us. So we reached into the bench, and the Lord started to provide both general laborers to come out and be the ones coming and slinging rods to drill the wells. We had teams of 6 to 8 people coming out, or 4 to 8 people coming out. And we had experienced mechanics. We'd always have one experienced mechanic on each trip. And oftentimes, if we could get a driller, someone with drilling experience to come out too. Within the first 2 years, I had, I guess, on the job training enough with some of these other drillers that I was able to fully manage those crews myself. Like I said, I had enough experience drilling before that I knew what was going on, but having someone else who was seasoned alongside was invaluable. But by year 2 of doing it, I had probably around 30 odd holes drilled under my belt, and being able to continue that way. And then as time went on, we were hosting anywhere from 4 to 8 teams a year, 4 to 8 people each of those trips. Our working season was anywhere from November to May. That was the dry season for the country that we were working in. And so that was the opportunities. When the ground is dry, you can get into the remote places. If the ground's wet, you're just sinking because it's mostly sand in a lot of the places we were working in. So yeah, the Lord provided. I remember when we had one of the guys is actually still working as an associate with the mission, Les Mather. When he first came out, really humble guy. We're standing around the circle. First time really met him on the ground, just kind of sharing about who we are and what we were doing, what normal life looked like. And so we're going around the circle, and you got a janitor here, you got a civil engineer here, you've got a carpenter over here, and then you've got a master mechanic in heavy engine diesel mechanics. And I was like, oh, Lord, what's going to happen on this trip? Why do we have you out here?
That's right.
And something happened. Like we had a major failure in the rotation head for the for the drilling rig. And we had to do essentially open heart surgery on the rig in the middle of the desert. And God had exactly the right person there in order to do it. And it's just stories like that it's just, God brings people out to be not only an encouragement for the ministry and the mission, not only get the work done, but I think it was that moment that Les also realized, just the same as me, that the job that we have or the skills that we have, God can use those for his kingdom. I think if Les wasn't out there, we would have had a machine that would have been broken down. But in terms of a testimony to the community that we were working in, it would have looked and seemed like, either failure or disappointment or challenge. And yet, because we had the right people out there, they were able to look and see a problem, but also a solution come into the picture. And we were quite open with them. And when the problem started happening with the deck engine or with the rotation head and we got stuck, we stopped and we prayed. We're in a Muslim community. They worship their gods and their ancestors and the spirits of the area. And one of the things I remember them saying was, the problem that you faced is because you didn't sacrifice. And we were able to pray, and the Lord gave the solution, and the machine was able to work, and water was able to be achieved, and a well was left at the end as that constant reminder of the God who provides over the gods of their lands. And it's just one of the testimonies of what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's always a ministry aspect to those teams, because not just do we drill the well and install the pump and help support them, when we leave, that missionary pastor or the Christian working in that village, they stay and then can share the gospel. So it's sustainability too.
Yeah. Yeah. And that really, for me, like those, so I hit the ground in 2009, and it was between 2009 2017 that I served in Burkina Faso with the well drilling ministry, and kind of I was part of building up that ministry profile and what we were doing there. It was during that time I met my wife, Megan, and we had 2 kids. So I have a son and a daughter who are now 9 and 11. And so it's a joy to be in ministry. And though there's sometimes I deeply miss being hands-on on the ground, doing that well drilling ministry that's been transitioned over to somebody else now. I'm thankful that my family, when we do have the opportunity to serve together, that we can go and we can engage with the work that God has for us, and that they can see and they can hear what we're all part of in terms of the ministry. Like, we might not be the ones on the ground doing the physical work right now. Like, I'm more behind a desk than getting my hands dirty. But to be helping others go, that's a big part of what I'm doing now, is just to be able to facilitate and advocate that.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's fast forward. We're no longer in Burkina, but we are still in West Africa drilling wells with another team leader. And like I mentioned earlier, a few years ago, you've transitioned into the full-time role of CEO or executive director, as we call it here in Friends in Action. What was that pivotal moment? What was that said, Lord, I feel, it is time to take on that new role, to leave the field? Was there a defining moment there?
Unfortunately, yes. And I say unfortunately because so we were back on home assignment in 2017. Plan was to go back to the field, and I was invited to breakfast with then the executive director, Tim Johnson, at the time, and our board chair up in Canada. And there was a sixth sense that I was going to be asked a pivotal question. And I remember asking my wife to pray for me for this. And turns out it was Tim shared that he would be looking to step down as part of a succession plan for the organization. And he was asking me to consider stepping into his role. And I remember sitting at that breakfast, at that restaurant, having breakfast, looking across the table at him. I just looked at him. I said, "No way, no way. I don't want your job. I don't want this. This is not me." And I remember leaving that restaurant and just being challenged by that. And not that I had made the right decision, not that I made the wrong decision, but just being challenged by that. And it would have been probably about a 6-month journey of praying and asking God, is this really what I should be doing? Until I actually had some peace in my heart where it was yes. I believe it was right for the organization. It was right for us as a family. It was right for a number of different reasons. Even thinking about some of the transitions that would take place where Burkina Faso would go a certain direction where we had to shift from one country to another with the equipment and have a new leader step in. It was just the right time of transition for all those things. But that wasn't an easy one because I so loved what I was doing. I so loved being able to be effective in this way. But one of the things that I remember the Lord just challenging me in, but also giving me peace about, was, where can you make the most impact for my name's sake? If you're in this country doing this work, then you're going to make an impact for the sake of the kingdom in one country. I'm asking you to spread yourself even further. I'm asking you to help lead so that others can go, and to be multiplying your passion and your desire through others. And for me, that has been defining my ministry with FIA. It's not my ministry, it's God's ministry, it's God's mission, it's God's work. But that's been defining how I see my part of being a part of Friends in Action. That's my role of being part of Friends in Action, is I need to multiply others to go. That's what I've been called to. I can go myself, but how much more effective if it's not me, if it's 5 that I can send, if it's 10 that I can send, if it's 20 that I can send, how much more effective can we be for the sake of the gospel?
That's a cool perspective. Yeah. To all have heard, right? Like the name of our podcast. Now that's a cool perspective, to be able to multiply like that, and that God would show you that picture, and give you the piece about that. So, as CEO or executive director of a mission organization, and in Canada, separated from our U.S. headquarters here, I'll protect you from the question, what's your everyday look like? Because I hate always getting what's your everyday look like. But what, as executive director, your role, just unpack that a little bit for us.
Sure. So as executive director, which is really, as you wear many hats, Andy, so do I. So exec director is only one of them. But the exec role is looking more so at the vision, direction, and overall leadership of the organization. And so when it comes to, not day to day, but probably more of a regular involvement or regular activity, it's steering the works of our international fields. So meeting with our different field leaders. We have 5 active fields where we're working in, plus a number of other partners. We've got certain champions that work with some of our other partners in some of our non-active fields or non-deployed fields where we don't have missionaries or international workers serving in. And so those champions help keep me connected with what's going on. And we're really trying to stay within the lane that God's established for us as a mission. And so construction, practical service does define the major part of what we do. A big part of, an overarching perspective is we accelerate kingdom work, gospel work, so that work can move forward. And it looks different in each of the different countries that we're in, which is why it's really important to have a larger perspective to make sure what we do still fits within our lane. Because it's really easy to start taking steps away from that.
Sure.
And we need to be intentional about just not doing good things to help, but to do God things, the godly things that are advancing kingdom work. It says in the Bible, the poor you'll always have with you. And I know that context is a little bit different, but the reality is there's always going to be a need somewhere. One of the things that defines our ministry, or this mission and this ministry, is all that is done in partnership with gospel workers with the end goal of seeing the gospel proclaimed. So it's not a humanitarian organization, even though sometimes it is humanitarian means that we use in order to get to the end of sharing the gospel. So as executive director, that's one of the things that I am responsible for is keeping that perspective and working with our people to help guard that vision, to promote that vision. So working within either our communications team, working through headquarters and our operations that are coming through our operations group, even working alongside our partnership development team to help grow and keep that vision in focus and alive and moving forward, that we support, we partner, we advance gospel works and ministries. Recruiting is a big part of it. So that's one of the major areas of focus heading into 2025 now. We have a lot of different areas where it'd be great to have some new full-time members with the organization, both full-time internationally on our team serving every day overseas on our field teams, but then also we've got our domestic operations that also need a fair bit of support too. Representing the organization to donors, developing new champions for the ministry. A lot of shaking hands and kissing babies, but that's a big part of
Sure.
what it is. And I would say, I think the other side of it is also caring deeply for our staff and making sure that as an organization that we are not just focused on what we do, but we also focus on how we do it and the people who are doing the work. Like I said, the poor you'll always have with you. There's always going to be another need, another project, another thing. But if we just focus on the work and not really care about the people who are doing it, we'll end up burning people out. And we I would like FIA to be an organization that's known not just for what we do, but also how we care for people as we do it.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, many hats. I know you probably don't even tell me half the hats you wear sometimes, but I know it keeps you busy. But you're very intentional on staying connected because being in Canada and us here in the U.S. And oftentimes you make trips down here for a while and spend some time with us. So it's always great to have that. But yeah, the fascinating world of technology. It is much easier to do things like this and be able to run an organization this way. So, as an executive leadership of the organization, what is there one thing that you would say is the biggest challenge that's facing mission organizations today? You rub shoulders with a lot of executive mission members and leadership. What's one of the biggest challenges that organizations are looking at right now?
What does the world look like in 5 years? And that's, I am coming off the back end of some organizational board meetings, just having had them this week. And that did characterize a lot of what we're talking about. The world has changed so quickly in the past 5 years, past 10 years. And as we ask ourselves the question, what do we need to do in order to stay effective for the Lord in ministry? Like, we believe that God's given us this calling to be partnering with him in ministry and in missions, and God's given us the calling to go and make disciples to all nations. And yet there's countries in this world that are not welcoming to gospel workers, that are not welcoming to that disciple making movement. There's countries that are close to that, but that's also where we're called to. And I thank God for the countries we currently work in, that there's a degree of openness. But even in some of those countries, that door, which has been wide open, it looks like it's starting to creep close. And so we've got a decision as an organization to either wait, just do what we've always done and wait until that door is closed and then figure out what's next, or to look ahead and to start making plans to adjust ourselves so that we can continue to be as effective as can be for the Lord, both in the countries that we are currently serving in, as well as the ones that we could be serving in. So that just because situations change, we don't stop, that we can keep pushing forward and keep supporting gospel partners and potentially create opportunities for gospel partners to be able to serve where otherwise they wouldn't have been able to serve before. It's very easy to be a reactionary organization that's looking just at today and the crisis and the circumstances of today. But then at some point, you're going to get to the place where, okay, well, that door's, that's done, that's closed, that's done, that's closed. Now what? And I think my responsibility, the responsibility of leadership is to be looking ahead to say, we believe in the long term, in the long game here, and we need to be planning further out. And so that's the big challenge. What's going to happen in a world that is increasingly becoming, I wouldn't say disillusioned isn't the word, but is increasingly becoming opposed to the gospel message of Jesus and who he is and what he represents. It doesn't mean that he's needed less. If anything, he's needed more. Yeah. And so what can we be doing to be effective for our partners to maintain that and to keep pushing that?
Yeah, very good. So with that in mind, and I know there's a lot of, just with your and my relationship, I know you guys got a lot of really neat God stories from the field and the time in the field. And even now as executive director, knowing what we just talked about it getting increasingly more difficult, was there ever a specific story or a short story you could share or a moment where short story.
Yeah.
that crystallizes what Friends in Action does and why our type of ministry is important right now?
A short story. I'll make it short. There's so many. There's so many. One of the ministries that I am closest with, and I've had the most face time with, of course, is our well drilling ministry in Africa. Before I say that, I do want to add one more thing in terms of going back to what's the biggest challenge, and like what's the challenge facing us. because I would also say it's not just the vision in terms of what we're going to look like X period of time, but also the people. We have a lot of opportunity that's coming our way in terms of opportunity to serve and to develop. But one of our most limiting factor right now is not having enough people to go to give and to send. And I think finding people, not finding people, the Lord's going to bring the people, but being able to show people where they are needed, and challenging them to be ready and willing to sacrifice their plans, their goals, their dreams for the sake of the Lord. It's funny because as soon as people start sacrificing their goals and dreams, they realize how much better God's goals and dreams actually are.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so I think that's I'd say that as well as the vision. Those are the two competing things with being really where the focus would be, or the biggest challenges moving forward is just being able to realize both of those areas. But to come back to your question about a story that crystallizes the need. A short story, and I've shared this before, but when I was serving overseas, it's probably, I think it was 2016. It was one of the last trips that I took out to one region of the country before it got closed due to terrorist activity. We had a team that was working in a community with a pastor, and very young guy. He was maybe a year out of Bible school, and actually, still in Bible school, but he was on this placement thing. And this particular denomination, the way that they developed their pastors was they gave them a year of formation or 2 years of formation in terms of biblical training studies, and then they sent them out to the community for a year. And if they survived the community in terms of a church plant, then they must be okay to float as a pastor. So they'd come in, finish their pastoral training, and then be redeployed as a pastor in an area of the country. And this town or this community that this pastor had been deployed in is essentially, it was a small Christian community of, I would say, around 30 people, and it was mostly old women and children. And it was deeply animistic. The community itself was divided by a river or a stream. It was dry during the dry season, but during the rainy season, a river flowed through. And there was a god of one side and a god of the other side, and you had to appease both gods if you're wanting to do any work in this community. So in working with this church, we rolled into town to start working with them, and they first and foremost, the elders of the community wanted to set up an altar or set up a sacrifice. And we said, no, we don't sacrifice, we pray in the name of Jesus, and it's Jesus that provides. It's the God of heaven and earth that does this. This God is stronger than your gods, and that wasn't very popular. But anyways, but for the sake of water, they were like, if that's the case, then we'll see. And so we drilled our first hole, and it was 300 feet of solid granite. It was just dry, dusty. It was about 12 hours of drilling and nothing but dust coming out of the ground. And the people were not happy. And they said, look, you've done your thing. Clearly your God's not powerful. Let's sacrifice to our gods, and then we'll try again and get a different well, and get a well. And we said no. And it began a bit of a verbal battle for the pastor. We shifted to a different location. We started to do work again. We had identified another spot that seemed likely for water. And during the time that we were drilling, and I clearly remember, I have this mental image of this. We're drilling away, and he's off to one side arguing with a group of 20, 25 men. And that day was hot, like unnaturally hot. And this is the kind of heat that it's more than just heating up the back of your neck or just hot, but it's like down in your soul kind of hot. And I would almost say there was something spiritual going on at the same time as something physical. And we stopped at around the 200-foot mark. We had been drilling, and there was nothing but dust all that same time. Looked very similar to the first hole. Did not look very promising. But we were just hot and we were tired, and we took a break that afternoon. And this pastor came over, and he said, I don't know what to do. He said, they're arguing with me. They're telling me all we need to do is sacrifice so we can get water. We really need water in this village. Maybe we should just sacrifice. We'll just sacrifice, and maybe we should just get the water. And I said, don't you dare. I said, you have been trusting in God Most High. You've been telling people who He is. I said, this is a chance for God to show up. I don't know how He's going to show up. I don't know if He's going to show up. I don't know when He's going to show up. but we know that he will, and that whatever is going to happen here is going to be for our good and for his glory. I said, you got to trust. And he's like, I want to trust, but I'm having such a hard time. And this young guy, he was in his early 20s. And so we just gathered around him and we prayed for him. We prayed for him. We prayed for the well. We prayed for all of that. I mean, this wasn't even well drilling. We were just had a ministry of prayer over this guy right on the side of the rig, because his faith was being challenged just based on what he was seeing and what he was dealing with. We get over to the rig, and we had, I think it was 200 foot was there. We had a 10-foot rod at the top. We started drilling down, and the next 10 feet was nothing but dust again until the last couple inches. And all of a sudden, all the dust stopped. And I was like, wait a second, what's going on here? We put the next rod on and started drilling, and it was like we had tapped into a fire hydrant. There's so much water that started gushing up out of the well. It started splashing over everybody, and started splashing over those 30 men who were just arguing and just telling him that your God has no power. Your God is weak. You just need a sacrifice. And I just remember pointing to Zechariah, pointing to this pastor and saying, here's your answer. You can't make that up. Yeah. Like, here's your answer. Here's where God is. Here's where God showed up. And so for me, that will forever characterize and mark the work that we're doing. We work in places so that people can see the power of God. We work in places so it can be an encouragement to the gospel workers that we're serving alongside. We work in places so that God can use the efforts of his servants and multiply them for the sake of his kingdom. That's what we do. That's why we do it.
That's cool. I've heard that story before. I absolutely love it, and I don't share it as eloquently as you do when I do share it, but it is a good reminder of why we do it, just to have that faith that God will show up. And he does. I mean, you and I've got the blessings to see it many, many times, and it's so cool. So no, I appreciate you sharing that. As we've shared on other podcasts, we are a missionary organization. We are missionary staff. So we're self-supported. We raise funds to support ourselves through ministry. Explain what that means to you and your family, and why that's essential that you're a self-supported missionary.
Sure. So being self-supported means we don't take funds from the organizational operating expenses or donations that come into the organization for projects or for where needed most. So we have partners, churches, families, friends, even people that we don't know who've actually come alongside to financially support us on a monthly basis or a one-time basis. I am not as regular at my updates as I should be, but I try and keep them informed in terms of what God is doing through the ministry, and really they become our prayer team. So support isn't just financial, support's also prayer. Right. And it really is a battle that we're in sometimes, and we really rely on the prayer support of people to be holding us up. We've got a list of churches and different people that support us financially that way. And so it's an encouragement to have that.
Hey, so what if somebody wanted to learn more about you or about FIA? What's your first go-to? Like, where would you point them first?
So I would ask if they want to hear more about what it is that we're doing. The email is probably the first way for me personally, or to get involved with us in ministry. So they get on our newsletter list that we send out. I'd also challenge them to get signed up with the challenge or with our organization's newsletter, because that's a great way, whether if it's by email form or by post. It's something that goes out on a regular monthly basis, and they hear stories about what God is doing and God stories. So not just here's what the project is and not a technical update, but here's what God is doing through the works of FIA and more importantly, our partners for the sake of the kingdom. So those are the two ways through the website. I mean, there's a great website that our organization's put together. It's informative, and it does connect people well with what's going on in the different fields of ministry.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so our website is fiaintl.org. The link will be in the show notes, along with Matt's bio link that's on our webpage and our leadership staff page. So check it out, fiaintl.org. A lot of good stories on there, some contact information to reach out. So as we wrap up, we want to bring us to a close. What is one thing that you wish people knew about when it comes to technical missions and the work of Friends in Action?
Yeah, that's a good question, Andy. Because there's so many different ways that we can go with that. A lot of people look at technical ministry or technical missions as not really being missions, and that's something I had to face in my own church, and to help kind of educate people. Just because you may not be the one communicating the word of God by being the one speaking to someone who doesn't know, or being the one planning the church. Many parts, one body. And it comes down to us being part of that support team that helps missionaries stay longer and be effective in the areas that God's called them to. That challenge that was given a long time ago to, I guess, the founding organization that helped birth Friends in Action was, how do we help our missionaries serve effectively when they don't have all the skills and all the abilities that they need to address every challenge or every situation that the community they're living in may present to them. You got stories coming from international workers where they've got to be the medic, they've got to be the builder, they've got to be the plumber, they've got to be the electrician, they've got to be the mechanic. Like, everyone in the community brings all their problems to the missionary, brings all their problems to the international worker. And yet their training has been academically or vocationally in how do we share the word of God. So my challenge, or what I would put out there about technical ministry or technical mission work, is that this is essential ministry to help keep our essential workers out there. The word of God has to be communicated. It has to be spoken, which means that people have to be out there speaking it. So our job is to keep those people out there for as long as possible until all have heard.
Great. Appreciate you finishing up like that. Yeah, I think, again, we mentioned it earlier. I think there has been, and there probably still is, a bit of a site that missionaries go to college, they go to Bible school, they learn about preaching and evangelizing. Well, that's important, and I don't mean to take that lightly. It's also important to be the technical side, the hands-on. And as Matt shared earlier, this is why we're doing this podcast, or at least a series of staff members on this podcast, is because we're just normal people. We're just ordinary people that God called to extraordinary work. And as Matt shared, it's, he felt called in a greater direction with Friends in Action, because God felt there's so many more people. There's so many more people that can hear with just a shift in ministry. So I appreciate you sharing, Matt. Like I said earlier, Matt's bio page link will be in our show notes, also our website. Check it out. We encourage you to do that. But I want to leave today, one of the challenges that I try to leave at the end of the podcast, Matt, or for everybody that's watching, is, how is God calling you to serve him? Again, we've had this, I think this may be our 6th podcast now, of just ordinary people that God has called to extraordinary work. And I think, as you heard Matt's story and some of the time he spent in the field, and now as leadership of FIA, it can be where you're at. It can be in your workplace. It can be in your school. It can be in your environment. And if that's where God has you, that's where you're called. But the important thing that we do here at Friends in Action is we try to reach the hard to reach places, as Matt shared. And we do that until all have heard. So until next time, thanks.